Hi, welcome to the coaching game. I'm Laurie Lawson, and I have my long time friend and cohort on DEI, Dani Ticktin Koplik. There's so many K's and T's in there, but I got it. I'm just going to call her Dani. That'll work. And Dani's been on this show before, and she called me. She called me because I had actually incorrectly identified DEI. And she said, that's not really what it stands for. And so I said, oh my God, come on and tell me more about, because what she considers herself a DEI specialist, and so do I. After talking with her, she's the founder of DTK Resources, and I love her terminology. This is a boutique executive coaching and leadership consulting firm in New York City. And she also calls herself the CEO whisperer, because she kind of just calls out what she sees, which is pretty unusual for today. So I just thought we're into May. Let's check and see what's going on in Dani's world. What's been happening, Dani? There's a lot been happening in the world outside.
A lot happening, a lot of thinking, a lot of strategizing, hard at work on a particular article. I have another one, on deck. Things that just occur to me where I see flaws or holes in things. And I was just reading someone else's post on LinkedIn the other day. Actually, it was a New York Times opinion piece. And this woman said she's much better at critiquing leadership power. She's much better at critiquing power than she is at wielding it. And I think that's probably my space. It's probably my space. I mean, it's hard to establish as an influencer, but I think I do. And I do it mostly by trying to set the record straight. I find particularly in larger organizations or in larger trends, people get caught up in particular vernacular, or it's, I got to get to it quick. Who's going to get me there quick, regardless of the quality or the content. So, I kind of live in that space of really thinking things through and trying to iron them out and show sort of a better way.
Well, tell me, first of all, let me define DEI, because I did it wrong the first time. So it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Tell me why that speaks to your heart.
Well, it always has. I started my coaching career after a long career in entertainment marketing and doing some account executive work. So I really understood what it meant to have a product that you had to sort of get across fast. I started my work coming out of retirement as a soccer mom, full-time mom for a number of years as a coach, an executive coach with a particular focus on women in the mid-ranks in organizations. And companies were hemorrhaging women at that time, and they didn't know why at that level. Mm-hmm. So, after a few iterations of my watching them and trying to protest what they were saying, first time it wasn't enough childcare, the next time it wasn't enough sponsors. 10 years later, they came around to my way of thinking, which said it really had to do with executive presence, how a woman has I didn't have the skills, which is one of the reasons why I bailed out mid-career. And I think a lot of women who had that opportunity do bail out because it's just too hard. I think we're seeing that now with minorities and disadvantaged people. I hate that word, but I think we're just seeing that a lot. Where the voices are crowded out. So diversity at first was the thing, but diversity and inclusion, I always did it I&D because I intuitively felt inclusion was much more important than diversity, which in the beginning for CEOs was like taking their medicine. Okay, I'm gonna have a certain number, a certain number, a certain number, but that did nothing to change the dynamic in the organization, the innovation, the collaboration, all of that. So inclusion is a much more powerful thing. Inclusion has led to another qualifier, which is one I have just semantic issues with, but there's a lot of discussion now about belonging. And to me, it's a squishy word. I understand what it's supposed to mean, but it feels like it's, I don't feel like I belong. I understand what it's trying to convey, but I don't like that particular word. Anyway,
it sounds a little whiny. It's like, I don't like it either.
Right, schoolyard or something. It just doesn't sound adult. So there's diversity, there's inclusion, and equity comes down to fairness. Not everybody is equal. We don't have the same skills. We don't have the same ability, the same potential, the same advantages, but we can be treated fairly. And so equity really speaks to fairness, which is one of these threats that we feel to our survival is a fairness threat that smart CEOs had to address during the real height of COVID, because people were getting laid off, and they really didn't understand why. It seemed unfair. But if leaders could communicate more openly and say, well, here's the calculus that we used, this is why, they might not be happy, but they don't feel it's unfair. So
where do you feel we stand today? You look back on documentaries from 50 years ago, and because that's civil rights has always been my cause, and I'm not sure why. Just started very young, and it was like, this is just so obvious. Why isn't this happening? You look back on documents from 50 years ago, and we're fighting the same issues we were fighting 60 years ago. It's like, wow, what is going to bring us over the hump? Are we ever coming over the hump? I don't know. What do you think?
I think so. I think that it is going to happen, and it's going to happen by attrition, unfortunately, because right now you have a lot of white men, older white men, still in charge of a lot of things, and biases die hard. And there is a threat that happens as other numbers increase and threaten the primacy of another group. So I think as that generation falls off and more people of color and women are in the pipeline and are attended to or given opportunities, that will change. And also just, on the nose, but the complexion of the country is changing. And in very short order, it's not going to be all white. It's just not going to be, or primarily white. It's going to look very different. So I think that with increased voice and commitment, but we also have to remember we have a very young country, and our mentality is still sort of manifest destiny, push bigger, harder, more. And I think we sort of have to come down off that, be humbled a bit, and understand that there are much more collaborative, inclusive ways to get much better results.
Well, in your boutiquing,
like spelunking, going into
really, I like it. Do you teach? Racial unbiased and what's your theory? I know what your theory is. Tell us why you think it can't be taught.
Well, I think that there's teaching and there's training, and what I really object to is the training. You cannot unwind bias and stereotypes and racism in a classroom with other people where, as soon as the instructor says who's biased, how many people are exactly going to raise their hand? The truth is, if you have a brain, you're biased. It's a survival mechanism. The question is, how do we override a lot of them? How do we use context and a deeper understanding of ourselves and how to almost like subjugate that survival thing that we've got, really understand that there are other elements in the mix, and that it's not just about, eat what you kill. It's just not, right? I hope not anyway. So teaching it is very difficult. What I try to do, training it is difficult. What I try to do is educate, but I have to be very careful not to go where I'm not wanted, because the truth is I'm a white woman, and I just have to tread lightly. I can call out injustices, but I cannot presume to have walked in someone else's shoes. I suppose I'm in a minority. I'm a woman and I'm Jewish. And so that puts me in a different category from, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who have been in charge of so much. But it's dicey, and you have to be very careful not to assume. There's this whole emphasis on empathy, and I did fall into that trap for a little bit. The truth is we can't feel what somebody else feels. We can feel compassion, but empathy it's presumptuous.
I think I shared this with you last time, but I understand so perfectly what you're talking about, because I had just finished reading the book Cast, which is a masterpiece. And it's like, oh my God, I want to get out there and do something. And it's like, well, who's going to listen to advice from a white woman? It's like, this is not something I can speak on. I can, like you say, empathize with it. I can call it out when I see injustice, if indeed I think it's going to do any good. But it's, that's very difficult. It's like, because once we presume, it's like, yeah, I got you. I know what you're talking about. You don't. And that just proves it right there. So I hear what you're saying on that. So what makes this not hopeless?
Well, it's not, what makes it not hopeless, and that's like just a really excellent question, is that I look at DEI as a living lab, as opposed to something that demands expertise. I don't think it's possible. This is, we've only had our reckoning 2 years ago, right? We did have the civil rights movement, but George Floyd triggered a whole other sensibility. So that's only 2 years old. And there was a lot of rush in by, the standard consultants saying that, okay, we now have a DEI practice. We are DEI experts, but they can't be. Nobody can be. We have to evolve with this and understand more and keep learning more and talking more and learning how to, suppress our own biases, because they come out when you don't even know it. I mean, I grew up bleeding heart liberal on the Upper East Side of New York City, and I catch myself on certain things just because, that was what the climate was. That's what, there was never a second thought given to some of these, as they say, microaggressions. I don't like the word microaggressions because I think any aggression causes trauma. So what's micro about it, right? What's micro about it? You say, well, touching a Black person's hair is a microaggression. No, that's an aggression. That is just without judgment, without sensitivity, without sensibility. So I think all of it is aggression.
It's so interesting, and I know that as a white woman and white person, I don't know what I don't know, and I think it's all about being open to coming upon yourself and going, oh, I didn't catch that. I've told this story before. My significant other is Black. Has been for 12 years. And
actually his whole life,
Yeah. And he had this thing about going in the stores and people asking him after he makes a purchase, do you want a bag? And it was like, what is your problem? It's environmentally, and people are bringing their own bags. And finally and this would go on all the time. And I just said, okay, he's a dear man, but he's got a little boogaboo about bags. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then one night we were listening to Roy Wood Jr., who's a stand-up comedy guy. And he said something about, hell yeah, when I go on Best Buy, I want a bag. And I want it stapled on it. I'm a Black man in America. I can get shot. And it was like, whoa, is that what you're talking about? And he goes, well, what did you think I was talking about? It was not a part of my reality. It's not something I think about. And it was like, oh my gosh. I just want to keep learning, but I don't know how you learn that. I guess that you have to just be open and go, all right, if someone tells you it's an aggression, not a microaggression, you have to accept that, because we don't know, how would I know that touching your hair? I don't like anybody touching my hair either, but how would I know that would be a major aggression? But it would.
I mean, the analogy is when people touch pregnant women's stomachs. Oh, that's so cute, right? That wasn't invited. That was not invited.
Absolutely.
By your closest, but that's the closest thing I can think. I'm thinking about the bag thing, and I have to tell you, I have the same worry sometimes, because I have to go into my bag to take my glasses out, and then I have to put it back in, and I am always worried about cameras. So I'm very overt in what I do that shows that I'm not stashing stuff away. Or if I come in and leave without purchasing anything, I make sure that
Walk
it's
out like this. No, I didn't take
right.
it.
So imagine that cubed, or, you know,
Yeah.
it's just right, because the presumption isn't that I'm doing that, but there is a presumption that other people are. So, you know, it is writ large. It's a very difficult thing.
It's fascinating. It's truly fascinating, and you just wish that we could all just commingle and learn from each other, and we do, and you know. But there are some people who are just so set in their ways. It's like, no, this is the way it's always been. This is the way it should be. God determined it, whatever. No, it's
Right.
like, nah, just expand that a little bit, you know.
Well, I'll give you an example of an experiment that didn't work, that was really well intentioned. Back in the 60s, there was this big move to integrate the public schools, at least in New York. I can't speak to the rest of the country. And it was done, and it was deemed a failure, same way as things like grooming minority students for Ivy League schools often turned out to be disaster, because there was no one who looked like them. There was no way to mingle. It was very skewed. But in the case of integrating the public schools, it was a failed experiment because it was Black kids who were bused into white schools in small numbers, but not vice versa. So the Black schools were never improved. The money never went to the Black schools. So in the end, what did it really accomplish? And you put these kids in, you know, in a spotlight of being just one of a very few in a very white school. So, you know, we have to think about these things doubly hard, and we have to look at them in a 360, not just from our point of view.
I love that. It never occurred to me. It's like, well, if we had sent white students to Black schools, they would have realized what the Black students were feeling.
Right.
Nobody got to do that. You know, the white people got to stand back and go, I either approve of this or I don't, but they never got to have that feeling. Yeah, what a good point. 360 is the only way to go, for sure.
The way to go. You know, another place, going back to your other question, where I have hope is in the one-to-one exchanges. And, you know, by that, I mean that it is very difficult, and this is sort of the essence of the piece I'm working on, it is very difficult to scale human change to 100,000, 500,000 people globally. You cannot do it under one umbrella. And, you know, maybe you can scratch the surface of an algorithm or change a hiring practice, but you're not going to change hearts and minds that way. Smaller companies, on the other hand, have much more immediate accountability. The CEO can walk the floor, as it were. Conversations are more immediate. Things can be called out more immediately. Maybe this is my pipe dream, but I really think that it's the one-to-one that is going to make the difference.
I like that, because you always hear trickle down, get to the top, and then it never trickles down.
No.
There will be a cog in the pipe somewhere, and it just
Exactly.
doesn't get down. But you're saying trickle up. It's like expand and grow up and
trickle
grow.
out. You know, a lot of big companies
right.
have these big community efforts, which end up being sort of performative. Okay, we're going to finance some program here or scholarship thing there, but I don't know that their employees actually take it home and fan it out. In a smaller company, when the discussion is normalized and there is a common language and it is everyday parlance, I think there's a much greater chance that this stuff goes out into the families and then goes out into the community. If you've got a 2-hour commute or something to some big company, or you're flying globally, it's very hard to radiate that stuff out. So anyway, maybe this is a Pollyanna thing on my part, but if we have to do this, I say do it that way first.
Yeah, let's go Pollyanna. Why not? Nothing wrong with Polly. But let me ask you, I've always, because I've done most of my career has been in nonprofit. And I always figure, oh, nonprofit, they really got their stuff together and they're out there helping people. And they deal with minorities a lot of times and things like that. And I always feel, well, you know, corporate, they're more bottom line, money. Do you see a difference in either when it comes to DEI?
I think maybe intention is different, but in my experience with nonprofits, it's like the situation is reversed. It's not about generating profit, which we know just by definition. It's about satisfying donors. So the money is still in the mix. Yeah. But it's flipped on its head. And so when every donor that you don't want to lose has a different point of view, or, it becomes, how do I not offend? How do I not offend? Yeah. So in that respect, I find it difficult to do this DEI stuff. I've seen, I was up for a position, not a position, but a gig with a prestigious prep school, and to help the head of school deal with DEI and other things. And instead they went with a guy on their board who sits on other boards, who happens to be a Black man, and he's their DEI person. And that is such a fundamental mistake. You can't go with the people within your organization. You can't tap a Black person and expect them to be able to run this or have the ideas. I mean, they can be a gut check, but it's a mistake. It's an imposition. On BIPOC employees to ask them to assume that role.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And also you can throw in with the nonprofit, they dance to many government rules, and so they are restricted in the sense. Whereas if you're dealing with financial, that's pretty equitable. If you make $1 million, it really doesn't matter about the color of your skin. You're going to get a bonus. You might get a less bonus. I don't know how it works because I've never been in that situation. But the bottom line is, here's the goal for everybody. So there is hope in all sectors, I think. You have a theory about, and you're a little concerned about the rush to purpose. We got about 6 minutes left. Tell us what that is and why you're concerned.
Yeah, I think purpose is one of those sort of trendy words right now. I understand coming out of the pandemic, we're still in it, but coming out of the heat of the pandemic, when people had to stay home and they have different priorities and they're trying to establish different priorities, and why am I going to work every day? The temptation is, what's thrown out there is, I need to find my purpose. As I say to graduating seniors who want to know whether they should take the nonprofit job or the internship that doesn't pay in the field that they love, or if they should take an internship that pays in something that's a little bit more generic or not in their eventual wheelhouse, the answer always is, it depends. Doesn't it depend on if you have student loans to pay back? Earn the money and then do that. So purpose is flexible, and I worry that people think there is something definitive about purpose and that they look for it externally. As the way I look at it is, purpose lives at the very tippy top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When so much of the world is worrying about scraping by, or fleeing a war, or dealing with refugee status, or trying to cross a border, or they're not thinking about purpose. Their purpose is to stay alive, and their purpose is to get food for their children. So this elevation of purpose kind of worries me. In addition, I think the pursuit of purpose can be as toxic as the pursuit of work-life balance, which I think never happens. And I like to think of it less as sort of this much of this and this much of this, as sort of an equilibrium. One thing gets out of balance, then another one rises. But who has the right titration of work and life in their lives? Yeah. They don't. I sort of feel the same way with purpose, that it can be anxiety provoking to think you are supposed to have a larger purpose in life. I think it changes with age. Young, you're there to protect your children and make sure they have, but at my age, it's about, okay, what's my legacy? Maybe we talk about legacy, not purpose, or we redefine it according to the stage of life. So I don't think it's one thing, and I think that it can make people anxious.
And those definitely make you anxious. I'm thinking, I think because in at the end of 2019 and 2020 and 2021, our purpose was don't get sick, protect those you love. And the corner office, by the wayside, a couple extra pounds, not so important right now. But so maybe, and I can't think of a good, I like legacy. That's a cool word. But I think purpose has to be expanded. It can be, and flexible. Well, again, we're still talking about flexibility. So that's a pretty cool word, I guess. But yeah, and just larger. So instead of rushing to purpose, what should they rush to?
Well, purpose is like this self-actualization thing. I think that what one does is one continues to learn about oneself, give as much as possible, explore ways of giving. I mean, I have started working with formerly incarcerated men and women and with some unhoused folks, and I'm supposed to mentor them, but they teach me so much more. It is, I hate the word humble also, but it is very humbling to have everything that I thought I knew just turned on its head, and really understanding what this life is like for them, how unfair it is, and to see the people push through with resolve. I mean, okay, I resolved to get that managing partner role, but that's not the same as resolving to stay out of a recidivistic life. Or to stay clean, or whatever it may be. So I think what we do is we find our purpose when we give as much as we can, and sometimes it finds us, which I think is much more reasonable. Have it find us.
And again, I think it's all a matter of being open to what comes your way and what can you do with it, and how can you include others in your cause, purpose, legacy, whatever it is. But I think I've got the title for or not the title, the topic for our next show. It'll be like George Carlin, words we hate.
Yes, exactly. I'm saying words that go to the dustbin. It's like, as I said to you the other day, synergy. Like, what happened to synergy? I'm glad it's gone. But the overuse makes it, unusable.
Absolutely. And we're hoping that woke is going by the wayside, because that's used, that's over it. But we know we're not going to rush to, if we rush to purpose, we're going to expand the meaning. We only have like 30 seconds left. How can people get in touch with you, or where will we find your articles and stuff?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, the articles come out in a newsletter, but I'm repurposing them, and I post a lot on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Dani Ticktin Koplik, on LinkedIn. I'm pretty controversial sometimes. I poke holes. As one colleague said, I poke the bear, and it's the bear that needs to be poked. So, that's where I am. And if you really need to reach me, you can reach me by email at dtk@dtkresources.com. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody.
And that's why we love you, Dani Ticktin Koplik. Yes. And we will see you again soon, because I love talking to you. Thank you, Dani, for being on the Coaching Game.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Laurie.
Bye-bye.